Hey everyone, Steven here with LuckyCasts, and today we're going to look at how to set up application-wide settings in your Lucky applications. Many of the configuration settings that you'll find in your config directory in a default Lucky application will contain these kinds of configure blocks. These are enabled because we use Habitat for all of these libraries. Habitat is another simple library that we've created that makes storing settings a little bit easier. For example, here for Authentic, I set my secret key. This means it's available anywhere that Authentic needs to access that data. Because Habitat is already a Lucky dependency, we can use it anywhere else we'd like in our application, including in a net new configuration file that we'll make today. Let's check out a specific scenario where an application level config would be useful. We'll head over to the layout head file, which contains some basic SEO attributes like the site title here and the site description here. Both of these are hard-coded currently, and if this was the only place we were using them, it'd be fine to leave it just like this. However, it's likely that you're going to need to reference your application name throughout your user interface, your email content, and other user notifications. So why not extract it into a setting that we can more easily modify and reuse in the future? In practice, your application name probably won't change very often. However, extracting this into a setting makes it much simpler to reuse code between applications, which can be a real advantage if you're a one-person team cranking out products. We'll get started by creating our new config file. We'll put this in our config directory. We'll call it application.cr. And inside of that file, we just need a class. So we'll call our class application, which isn't reserved or anything like that for a Lucky application. Now, within this class, we need to tell Habitat that there are settings involved. We do that by calling habitat.create and passing it a block. In that block, we're going to use our DSL to define which settings are available for the application object. In this case, we want one setting called name of type string. The last step is to define the setting. We need to do that with application.configure do, and we'll give it a local variable called settings that we're going to access. And all we have to do is set settings.name equal to our static string we had in the layout head file. So application config. We'll save that, head back over to our layout head file, and now we can substitute this static string for our new config value. We'll do that with application.settings.name. Now we have a reusable application name that we can use throughout our entire application. It also makes it so that I can copy and paste this head section a little bit more easily into other applications if I do any fancy customization for my page title or next for my page description. This is a little bit more complicated, but not much. Let's head back over to our application config and we'll add a new setting called description. That's also going to be a string, and we can define this using a here doc. Settings.description equals, and let's give this we'll call it text here doc, and we'll go back to our layout head. We'll copy this string, head back to our config, and paste it in. And there we go. Now we've got our application description and name in two different settings. And in our layout head, we can change this to be application.settings.description rather than a static string like it was before. Now this is truly reusable. For any Lucky application that has those two settings, a name and a description, I can copy this entire render block and reuse it among all of my applications. Let's take a look at one last example where an application-wide setting can be really useful. We'll go to our base email configuration here, and we'll note that our default from address is set to a support email, no reply at applicationconfig.com for this example. It's likely, however, that you're going to have a lot of different areas of your application that reference the support email. Maybe a privacy policy, a contact page, an about page, that kind of thing. Let's extract this into a setting so that it's easier to reuse across our application without having to remember that it's in a Carbon namespace or access this default from function or anything like that. So what we're going to end up with is application.settings.support email. So let's go ahead and just make the change here that we want to see. And then we'll pull this out. We'll head over to our application config and we'll add a new setting called support email. And that's going to be a Carbon address. Note that I'm not pulling out the individual name and email address, but actually making this a Carbon address object. It makes it a little bit easier to work with, and we can take advantage of all of Carbon's helper methods anywhere that we use this email. So let's call it settings.support email, like we just noted in our code, and we'll paste this in, and just like that, it's extracted. Let's go back to our base email, and we can see that the code is a lot more simple. We can reuse it among our applications a little bit more easily, and we've now made it explicit, where if we want to change our support email in the future, which might be a common activity, to change this to something like support, for example, this change is now made in one place and propagates to everywhere in our application that referenced that support email. I do want to note that this file can become a bit of a junk drawer over time. You can start throwing things in here that don't necessarily belong together, that are unrelated, and then it makes it a little bit more difficult to maintain in a long-term basis. That said, I think this is a perfectly valid approach for the early days of an application, and as soon as you notice that mental overhead becoming a little bit higher, start breaking it out into separate configuration files or nesting these settings with the appropriate libraries that are already included with a Lucky application. I hope this look into Habitat and how you can leverage it in your Lucky applications in a more custom way has been helpful, and has given you some ideas for improvements you can make in your own applications. Until next time, this has been Steven with LuckyCasts. Have a great day.